Welcome to today's Cybersecurity Insiders webinar. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules. Today's webinar is brought to you by HelpSystems, providing enterprise solutions to help IT secure, automate, and optimize their data and systems. In today's webinar, we will discuss how to mitigate cyber risk through SIEM, including the types of cyber threats organizations face, organizations' security challenges and priorities, and the benefits of SIEM and how to deploy this technology to mitigate cyber risk. My name is Holger Schulze. I am the CEO and founder of Cybersecurity Insiders, the online community for cybersecurity professionals, and I'll be your moderator today. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our featured presenter, Bob Erdman. Bob is Security Product Manager at HelpSystems. Welcome, Bob. Thank you for presenting today. Bob, can you tell us more about what threats organizations are facing and how SIEM technologies can help mitigate those risks?
Yes, thank you, Holger. So we're going to have a great discussion today about those things along with others. And we'd like to start out with one of the very surprising things that we gained out of the survey that we did recently. How confident are people in their organizations? And really, we saw that slightly more than half of the professionals that we surveyed said they're really not really super confident in their organization's security posture. Might you have some comments, Holger, on why you think that could be?
Yeah, Bob, that's a good question. I'm not all that surprised, right, about this lack of confidence, considering that, cybersecurity professionals, they're facing a number of headwinds, right, in their daily battle, if you will, against cyber threats. And just looking at the big picture, it's starting with increasing sophistication, right, of adversaries and threats. And that alone is enough to keep IT security pros on their toes, if you will. But add to that the widening, cybersecurity skills gap that organizations are facing. And on top of that, the challenges around shifting, right, security postures from a passive, more reactive stance towards more proactive defenses, and all that taken together, I completely understand, what causes this confidence level to drop. But Bob, curious, what do you believe is behind this low confidence metric?
I think that security skills gap is a really important point. Depending on what report you read, the estimates vary a little bit, but it's essentially, 1 million to 3 million qualified professional jobs will essentially have trouble filling those positions because they can't find people that can do that actual task for them. They're either having to invest in localized training or go out and change their hiring practices. And then there's just that explosive growth in the different types of technologies these days. We look at things like the rise of cloud technologies. Many times those are not fully understood across these organizations. All of the different types of data stores, APIs, and interconnections can become a big problem as people, jump out into the cloud and start to get their feet wet. Somebody spins something up on their credit card and starts to post some data out there because it's easy to share around their department. If they don't fully understand the technology that they're suddenly living in, they can cause a lot of damage to an enterprise organization. And we also see a big problem with shadow IT. That cloud technology is one of them. It's super easy for me to spin up an Amazon account. I can probably do it in 15 minutes if I have a credit card. People are plugging in devices on the network. Why do I want to wait for IT if I can quickly spin up a router from Best Buy, and put that up and get access that I need? People are going to try and go around IT if IT is not responsive enough for them. There's also that increasing burden of all the different regulations, and that's really being fueled by the constant stream of data leaks that we're seeing out in the wild. GDPR coming, the new California privacy laws. There's a bunch of other states here in the U.S. that are also implementing their own versions of these privacy laws. We just heard about the new law in Australia from last week dealing with encryption and endpoints and what kind of data that the government now wants to get access to and how that's going to affect all of these different global organizations. And then, of course, there's that exponential growth of malware. State-sponsored organizations are out there looking for secrets. There's activist groups, protesting either real or perceived wrongs that they think were done. And then there's just plain old criminals looking for any way that they want to make money. And tools needed for even the low-level hackers are easily available on the dark web. So that landscape keeps changing really, really fast, and it's a back-and-forth battle, of course, to continue to protect our networks. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are being introduced on both sides of the fence. So as we, as security professionals, bring those technologies into the products to help make our networks more secure, the hacktivists, of course, are also looking at those same technologies to find easier ways to penetrate into our networks and get at our data. And then we continually have that issue of the business leaders are driving us to use these new technologies to deliver better results. So we have the burden of training up our staff, we have to hire the appropriate knowledge, we have to properly implement all these technologies, and sometimes, honestly, we have to push back. If people are trying to do things that are insecure in our networks, they're not listening to security guys, and we know that a lot of times they won't. Sometimes we have to phone a friend. We have to call up risk, call up compliance, walk up to that CISO's desk and say, are you willing to accept this risk for this thing they want to do? Many times they'll say no and they'll help you out. So, things that can be really detrimental to our security in the long run are things that we have to deal with. Billions of records were disclosed in 2016, again in 2017, probably again here when the final count comes in 2018. I mean, Marriott alone was almost 500 million records. So it's a continual problem that we need to deal with. So is SIEM technology really important to organizations? More than 3/4 of the IT pros that we surveyed said yes, it's a really important part of their overall security plan. And if you're not familiar with what SIEM technology really is and why we should care about it, security information and event management solutions have really evolved from a combination of various technologies that all needed to work together to help provide a more holistic view into the environment. They started out really as log management systems, collecting and centralizing the log data from many different systems and applications, allowing for easier access and review, combining that with security event management solutions. So very similar to those LMS systems, but more targeted at security analysts and system administrators. So highlighting significant log entries for faster analysis, and then pulling in security information management, essentially an asset management system that also incorporates security information about those assets. So additional information can be correlated with those assets like vulnerability reports, antivirus information and status, intrusion detection and prevention logs, and many other types. So a SIEM combines all of these features along with event correlation, which is essentially the ability to recognize patterns of related events across the different data streams, picking out the problems and the possible indicators of compromise that require your security analyst to take immediate action. SIEM technology is really all about looking across the network and connecting the dots. So even small organizations can easily have dozens of computers, network devices, websites, and users that you need to process through. Mid-sized organizations can easily have hundreds or even thousands of these data points. And depending on the type of business and geographical layout, that can grow into the millions sometimes. Manually processing all of these data streams is just really not feasible. A single log entry is like looking for a needle in a haystack. And if it slips by, that attacker is now embedded in your network and maneuvering for greater and greater access. We want to make sure that we have a SIEM to gather, analyze, and present the information about our security and events with real-time monitoring, correlation, notification to us when needed. And then it also generally provides us long-term storage for our logs and our compliance and analysis. So your network generates a really vast amount of data every minute, and you can't hire enough bodies to read through every line. If you tried, people are just going to lose focus and miss things anyways. It's just going to get lost in the noise. And a SIEM really allows us to correlate those interesting events in that data and present them with appropriate criticality to our teams so they know that they need to take appropriate action. We want to use that event correlation to embed security knowledge into our searches across all the different things happening inside of our infrastructure. So one piece of information leads to another piece, and then leads to another piece, and you start to get that complete picture. That's a key piece of the functionality in a SIEM. So it's meant for you to solve your day-to-day issues, like analyzing your logs for security intelligence, centralization and aggregation of all the different data streams that are coming out across the network, helping us make sure that we meet the spirit of our compliance mandates. And then tracking suspicious behaviors, correlating different related events as they happen, and assisting us with conducting root cause analysis if we do discover an issue that we have to deal with. So there's many different examples out there. A simple one would be, I'm leaving the company. So as a security administrator, I want to know everything that Bob did in the last 48 hours. Is he off copying our customer list and our intellectual property down to his thumb drive so he can walk out of here with a bunch of data? Or maybe how many Windows accounts were locked out across the environment yesterday? How does that compare with what happened a week ago or maybe a month ago? Is there a statistical difference happening that might indicate that some outside actor is trying to brute force his way into our passwords? Maybe why were a bunch of servers spun up in a cloud environment? That's a region that we don't usually operate in, so we're not really expecting to see anybody in there. Has somebody compromised our management console? Maybe they're stealing our resources to perform malicious actions. So we want to be able to get meaningful data out of these systems, something that makes sense to us so that we can actually read it, understand it, and take action upon it. SIEM technology also gives us some additional benefits, front-end auditing and security compliance to help block bad things from happening in the first place. And it would really be great if every operating system and every application and piece of hardware would just generate data in the same format. But unfortunately, they don't. Log events are coming at us in many different formats and wording. So a user creation on my router looks totally different than a user creation in my Active Directory or in my CRM database or in my Oracle database. Much of that log messaging was really built to be readable by humans. And it makes it really hard for machines to do that. It makes it really hard for you to generate good, broad searches across your environment. And that's where we want to normalize those events. That's another key function of a SIEM, is to read all of those different types of data coming in and different data streams coming in and normalize that context so that we can understand that a user was created here or a user connected from this asset to this asset, no matter where those things are or what assets those might be. And once we've normalized that data, we want to make sure that we can forensically search through it. So we want to be able to investigate events. What else occurred on this same system around the time of this suspicious log event? Or what other systems were accessed from the same IP or by that same username? Thinking back to me leaving the company, where was I going the day before I left or the hour before I left? What systems was I accessing? What files was I trying to download? Was I taking screenshots of important data and then trying to copy them out of the network, emailing into my personal email or something like that? Maybe we see a number of failed logins on a workstation and then finally a successful one. That looks kind of suspicious. Did users just simply forget their new password and they finally remembered it after 6 or 7 attempts? Or did somebody malicious just guess their way into our network? It gives us a way to take a look at what else occurred on that workstation since that successful login. What has that ID done? What are they connected to? So that data shows us if there are additional indicators of compromise, alerts us to the criticality of what's going on, and gets our analysts working on the right things, separating that important data from the noise of the day-to-day network traffic. A vast majority of security professionals have really indicated that SIEM helps them reduce the occurrence of security breaches. So using SIEM technologies is one of the big things that they do to help from being compromised. And there's a number of reasons for that. We've already covered a few of them. SIEMs are very important at detecting unauthorized access or advanced persistent threats or APTs. They're good at seeing malicious or even careless insiders. It's estimated that between 25 and 33% of breaches were actually perpetrated or caused by insiders. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just somebody doing something wrong. They click on a file they shouldn't have. They open a port they shouldn't have, or they forget to turn something off that they turned on just for what was supposed to be a short time. So SIEMs are much faster than human eyes, and we can look at all of those thousands of data points across all of our different systems and correlate those indicators of compromise together, give us that complete picture. So it really acts like a force multiplier for your analysts. They've got limited time and resources to become familiar with every device and application on the network. Every time you spin up something new, now they've got to learn how that log looks. What's the normal course of business that we see day to day? This thing spikes at 8 o'clock when everybody comes in, slows down over the middle of the day, spikes up again over lunchtime when everybody's leaving. How does that normally look? What looks different when things happen? So, if it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then we kind of think, we better go take a look at it. Gives us a lot of better threat detection improvements. So, if our SIEM detects and alerts within seconds or minutes, it helps us contain that blast radius of a compromise. And even if it's within hours or days, is that really worth it? Generally it is. And we see that a lot of people, when we query with them, they usually get it within seconds or minutes, sometimes even, in hours. And that really reduces your cost. So the sooner we find that compromise, the cheaper it is for us. The average time to discover a breach in 2017 was about 191 days. And that's actually down from 2016, but it's still a really long time. And then when you add on to that the cleanup, which can take additional days or even weeks, the faster we can get to that context, the quicker that we can eliminate the source of the problem, and the cheaper it is overall for our organization, because the longer it takes, the more money it's going to cost us to deal with the problem. And a lot of times these compromises are coming from fairly simple things, like the need for patching, making sure that our systems are being kept up to date in a timely fashion. So we think about some of the breaches that occurred, last year, some of the big ones, or earlier this year. People were getting into systems through known vulnerabilities that had already been announced, publicized, which means all the hackers knew how to use them, but the corporations hadn't patched their network. We think back to that, one of the large shipping companies that got hit by NotPetya last year. They traced that back to a single application loaded on a single workstation over in Europe. Once it got a foothold, spread everywhere using, Eternal Blue, which was a known vulnerability that had been patched at the time. They could have patched for that issue and really contained that much better than what they did. It eventually actually took down all of their domain controllers and everything else. They had to recover from backups that were days old at best. They didn't even have backups of their domain controllers, because who's ever going to think I'm going to lose, I think they had more than a dozen domain controllers spread around the world. Who's going to think they're all going to go down at once? The only thing that really saved them is they actually had an office that was offline for infrastructure issues, and they were able to get a machine that hadn't been infected because it hadn't been powered onto the network, and physically transport that to another location to replicate back into their network and save them. It still took them days. It cost them millions of dollars. The average cost of a breach last year was about $3.6 million. And that equates to around $150 per stolen data record. So, just getting back to that notion of the sooner we can contain these things, the more money that our organization is going to save in the long run. If a breach gets too big, we're of course going to have to issue press releases. We're going to take a hit on our corporate image. We're going to lose brand loyalty. We're of course going to deal with the cost of cleanup. So we have to pay for these security guys to come in, forensics teams to come in. They've got to do the work to trace the issue, to get law enforcement involved. We're probably going to have an increase in our cyber insurance. Depending on our line of business, we might have to pay for credit monitoring if people's credit card data has been compromised. So these costs can really spiral really quickly. And why, $3 or $4 million to some global organizations isn't enormous. They're probably more worried about their brand loyalty. $3 or $4 million to a mid-sized company can be a lot of money, and it can really do a lot of damage to them. And then you start to add on regulatory fines, civil lawsuits, and everything else. GDPR can take up to 4% of your revenue as a fine. So it can be a really big hit to some of these organizations. So what are some of the use cases for our SIEM? Ultimately, that's what we want to solve. What are our use cases? How do we solve them? Authentication tracking is a great one. Detecting unauthorized access on our systems. Things like multiple login failures followed by a successful login. We talked about that. What's our internal response plan? Are we automatically going to assign that to someone to investigate and verify? So as soon as we see that happen, somebody gets alerted. If we deem something malicious, is it automatically going to disable that account and communicate with the end user to verify their intentions? So we also have to think about what we're going to do when we get these alerts. Maybe it's malware or vulnerability management. We discover malware on a system, or we discover that critical security control is missing from a new server deployed in the cloud. Or maybe an S3 storage bucket is leaking data. It's been created with much too open read-write accounts, so it's not properly protecting our data from unauthenticated users on the internet. We see that one quite often. People spin up a data bucket, maybe up in S3. There's many different options for how you secure these things. Wide open to the internet is usually not a good one. There's another one that trips a lot of people up, though, if you're specifically working with Amazon, and that's authenticated users. They're thinking, great, anybody who authenticates from my office, they can have access to this because it's my office data. And that's not really what it means. It's any authenticated user on AWS, which is millions of people that now suddenly have access to that. So there's lots of ways you can slip up with these configurations, and you can use these SIEM tools to help you automate that detection and response plan, because we'll guarantee those malicious actors are using those automated tools. They are scanning continually to find those weaknesses, and we need to make sure that we're also using the appropriate tools to secure our systems and remediate any of the issues that we find. And maybe it's as simple as firewall rules configuration. Does System X have a rule set consistent with our corporate standards? Or are we seeing constant denials of packets and connections, indicating that somebody's trying to force their way into our networks? So understanding and recognizing, not only the failures that are raising alerts, but also when events that are successful in their actions, when you take them together as a whole across the network, are really a security problem that we need to be alerted to. So maybe a new user is successfully created. Probably not something that's going to concern us, but then what if that user is immediately put into use? That's not normal. We don't usually see a user built and instantly used to log into a critical server. That should raise a red flag on our side. If they've accessed that system that they shouldn't have had any business being in, or maybe they did it after hours, we're going to definitely bump up that security level and take immediate action on that. So we think about some of those larger breaches that have been in the news. Spinning up servers in the cloud. So somebody gained access to a management console, used that management console to spin up systems in a different region of a cloud deployment, and started mining for crypto coins. Are we seeing new servers come online that we didn't expect? Are we seeing processes spin up on systems that we have running that we didn't expect to be there? Are we seeing increased load on those systems? All of those are indicators that something is going on. Maybe we're seeing content changing on our website. That could be an issue with people maliciously altering files, trying to do cryptojacking or website skimming. Maybe we're seeing ransomware starting to encrypt files on a network device. If your EDS missed a malware infection, but we're starting to see files being encrypted with those standard list of different file names that we see as people are getting their files compromised, or even just that the files are changing at all. That's another reason we may be having an indicator of compromise that we need to look into. And a lot of times people are struggling, especially when they have hybrid environments. So we have configuration of premise systems, and we have configuration of cloud systems. And we need to make sure that we're detecting not only that we have poor configurations in-house, but that we have poor configurations out in the cloud that are open to compromise. And then there's always our good old friend, the denial of service attacks. More and more that's becoming a bigger issue as people are compromising Internet of Things devices and then using those to launch attacks against other people. So maybe your PAC accounts are spiking, or you're seeing a large amount of junk traffic being dropped. So we want to use our SIEM to quickly identify those different types of issues and alert us, and then provide us with workflow to go out and remediate and deal with that problem. So bringing in our analysts, bringing in our security controls, auditing through as we deal with that, remediate it, store off what happened, making sure that we have that complete audit trail. So we're using our SIEM to accelerate that response plan and make sure that everything is being done as quickly as possible. And there are some different types of delivery models for SIEM. It's something that we definitely need to think about as we go out and decide to deploy this type of technology. Where are you going to host your new SIEM solution? Are you going to put it on your premise network? You're going to put it in a public or private cloud. Maybe you're going to have a combination of both. You'll have some elements of it in-house, some elements of it living out in your VPC in the cloud. So if we put it out in the cloud, then do we have to worry about anything else? Are there regulatory issues that we need to worry about? Can it cause a delay in our learning and response plans? If we put the whole thing internal, can we provide the appropriate infrastructure for the storage retention requirements to meet our compliance mandates? Those are different types of decisions that we have to make as we decide to implement these technologies. Then we also have to think about how it's going to be managed. So will our own internal personnel run the whole show? Or maybe we want to offload this work to a managed service provider. And then there's always, of course, the option of a hybrid model where we both share responsibility. So internally we're watching, externally they're helping us watch, more of a staff augmentation type of scenario. And then there's definitely the cost consideration, and that usually boils down to one of two different options. Either pricing that's based upon the amount of data that you put into the solution. So the more data you generate, the more the solution licensing costs. And that can be sometimes hard to plan for. If your business increases or you have a big spike for Black Friday, that can increase your licensing costs, increasing your log volume. Or other times, commonly, people will hide data from their SIEM sometimes. They don't want to take that rise in cost. So they'll try and filter down the data that actually goes to the SIEM. And that can have some effects upon how good the SIEM is at noticing what's going on. Because if it's not getting the full picture, it sometimes can't tell you the full picture that it should be seeing. And the other pricing option generally is based upon the number of monitored endpoints. So count up your servers, your PCs, your network appliances, multiply it by the cost of each type of item. Pretty simple model to manage. Data volume really is irrelevant at that point. The costs only increase when you add net new systems into your environment. And occasionally you'll even see that model based upon the number of employees or network logins or Active Directory logins that you have in your organization. Generally, when I've seen those types of solutions, though, they're a little more focused on monitoring only certain areas inside of the enterprise. Then, of course, those choices can be combined and overlap and create additional options for you. So how you're going to manage it, with where you're going to manage it, with what type of pricing model you want to get. So you want to make sure that you have the right type of expertise on your staff. Are they capable of doing all the work? If they are, they're going to have free time to perform it. Will the complexity and requirements of the solution you choose require you to add staffing to perform that care and feeding? Or is that solution going to do what you hope, which is reduce your time, reduce the amount of time you spend chasing on events that really aren't critical, get your staff focused in on what really matters to that organization? And we need to think about who's going to receive our alerts from our system. Sometimes people prefer for that to be offloaded to external staff, have somebody else take that initial triage look, determine if they think it's real or not. And even with that approach, you're still going to have somebody with hands on the system for triage and perform remediations. You're going to need that local admin role with access to remediate anything discovered in a timely fashion. If you are alerting somebody else, what's their SLA requirement to get back to you? So if they see a positive indicator, are they going to be emailing you? Are they going to be running down a phone calling tree in the middle of the night to find you? Or are they going to be entering a ticket into your help desk system? So all of those things are decisions that we have to make. We have to bring in our business leaders, our risk managers, our compliance officers, and make sure that when we implement this solution, we're implementing it in the manner that is best for us. And then as we manage that long term, how are updates going to be performed when there's new capabilities and detection rules that are made available? If you have external resources being that first line of eyes, are they going to just monitor and report, or are they also going to do active threat hunting? If you keep it internal, are they going to be doing threat hunting? Are they going to be using this as an extra piece of work? So they've got their normal workload, plus now I want you to manage the SIEM. Are they going to be able to hire additional staff? Or is this solution going to help you not need those staff, free up some time, make it easier for your people? That's what we really want, is to get people focused in on the critical things happening on the network in the most efficient manner possible. And we all know that SIEM is going to cost us a little bit of money. Our goal, of course, is to make the SIEM pay for itself and make it save us money. And there's lots of costs really to not using a SIEM. We see it over and over. Failing compliance audits, so having a way to verify, validate everything that I need to for the different regulatory regimes that I am responsible for. Data theft. So are we able to detect when people are taking data where they shouldn't, pushing data off the network, malicious actors that have gotten in and they're moving around and stealing data from us? All of that increases our burden on security operations. We want to give them more time to go after those critical issues, remediate our problems, not always be scrambling and chasing their tail after things. We want to make sure that we speed up our investigations and our response times. So SIEM can find the issue, automatically assign the issue to the right analysts, alert the security teams that the issue is happening, bridge that gap into your workflows to more quickly get at the issues that are relevant to you. Do we have a good way to detect privilege escalation? Somebody gets into the network, gets an elevated privilege through a hole in one of our things that we forgot to patch, and now they have unfettered access to things that they shouldn't have, or they're trying to move laterally around the network. That's where we want that correlation and context. We see somebody get in, we see them move, they're doing things that a normal user wouldn't be doing inside of our network. And then we, of course, just have the big newsworthy list of breaches and credit monitoring insurance and stock devaluations and cyber costs. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can to protect our networks at all of the time. And we've got a list of criteria that we generally want to look at when we're starting to talk about moving to SIEM. So what are the kind of things that we need to look at? We want to make sure that we have real-time monitoring and alerting. So we need the ability to monitor and correlate these threats in real time as they come in. Malicious actors, malicious code files move really quickly, and we have to be able to move at that same speed. If somebody gets access to the network and launches something, how fast can they move that blast radius from one person's desk to one department, to one division, to the whole campus? We want to make sure that we have user activity monitoring. So privileged user monitoring is a requirement of many of the compliance regimes these days. And if we monitor all of our user activity, it really helps us be alerted to breaches, misuse, maybe mistakes that our customers are making on a daily basis, so that we can make sure that we do the best job of helping our employees protect themselves. We want to have the ability to do use case investigations, security related and sometimes not security related. So reduce our risk by letting us focus in on the common use cases in our environments, making sure that we can separate critical events from the noise of the system. So maybe date and time changing on my financial system is a really big deal. Throwing off these transaction times is a big problem, and we need to have that as a critical alert. Where maybe date and time changing on my development non-prod networks, not such a big deal. Great that you told me it happened. I don't need to raise that up and have somebody chase it down, because developers do that all the time as we're testing out the software, making sure that things work the way they should as different things happen. We want to do threat detection and correlation across our whole environment, not mattering what type of system is on the back end. If it's Linux, if it's Windows, is this coming from a database store? Is it coming from an internal application log? Maybe it's a web services front end. All of these things are sources of really important data. We want to make sure that we can ingest them, normalize them, and correlate between them so that we can see that place where somebody ingresses into the network, where they try and spread out to, how we can contain them, stop them, get them out. And of course, we really need to make sure that we have reporting. So solutions need to be capable of delivering contextually relevant reports to you. We need to be able to hand our management team, hand our compliance auditors, reports about what has been done and what's happened inside of our network to make sure that we stay compliant. Long-term event storage is also very relevant. You may not know that you need this information immediately. So what if you detected a breach a week after it happened and you don't have that last 7 days of data to see what was done in the past now that you found somebody? So we need to make sure that we have that around. Some kind of tiered storage, or we have our active data, we have our archive data. Some mandates are 5 to 7 years that we should keep that data around. So we need to be able to keep that data relevant for us so that we can use it when we need it. Does a solution integrate with other tools? So can you pull in data from antivirus systems? Can you pull in data from cloud security tools, from auditing and compliance monitoring solutions? So we want to make sure that we have an easy way to extend the functionality of the system by allowing other tools that we already have in our environment to feed data to us. The more data we have, the more things that we can look at, the more contextual relevant alerts we can fire off, the easier that we can find things happening across the environments. And finally, we want to have some customizability of the data feeds. So are you able to specialize things to your applications and your environment? Maybe you have an in-house designed application that you want to monitor. Are you able to pull that feed into the system, gain relevant data out of it, and alert just like you would from your Windows event log on your domain controller? So you want to be able to treat everything equally importantly, depending on what it is in your environment, how you need things to look, and where you want to find that information from. Ultimately, we want to solve our problems. So we want to use these solutions to make our lives better, make our networks more secure. So Holger, hopefully that was a lot of good information for people. We want to make sure that we leave some time for questions, as well as a link to get to the full report if people want to take a look at the whole survey that was done and what kind of answers their colleagues and peers gave to us. Have we had any questions come in while we've been talking?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. There's actually a couple of questions that we'll get to in a second. Bob, the first question, do you have any recommendations to improve the effectiveness of a SIEM solution?
My short answer would honestly be use it. A SIEM is really not like a firewall or an IDS appliance where you just set it and forget it and kind of walk away until something changes. That SIEM is providing you with actionable intelligence all of the time. And the more that you use it, the more you understand the alerts that are coming from it, the better value that you're going to get out of it. So people have a tendency to, point their data feeds at their SIEM, reduce their alert volume a little bit, and then what? That baseline SIEM data is pretty good, but you need to take a little time to understand what's happening around your networks and get that specific context around your events. So ultimately, we want to filter out the noise and get down to those few really important alerts that need immediate action. So this is my development environment area. This is my finance environment area. These are the security controls that hone in on those specific places inside of my organization. Who should be communicating to who, from where and at what times. And then we add our specific business context into that. We also want to make sure that we take advantage of the front-end auditing and compliance functionalities of these SIEM solutions. So making sure that our systems are properly secured to start with. We have hardened configurations. We're making use of user privileges. So, the principle of least privilege, making sure that people don't have more access than they should. Is our antivirus limited to running on all their system endpoints, for example? Are we seeing it not running in some places that it should be? So we want to use all these tools that are being provided to limit the possible avenues of attack. That's going to limit the amount of alerts rolling into our SIEM, and it's also going to protect us from possible exploitation. And context-wise, we could say that maybe a SIEM sees somebody log in from a local desktop workstation, and then also from a VPN connection. Would that be normal? Not usually, so that's the kind of thing that I would probably raise an alert on. And as I start to look at my data to understand, to be honest, I do that personally quite often. So on a regular basis with one of these software demonstrations that I do, I need to show local and remote user ends of the product at the same time. So understanding that, hey, Bob does this a lot, but he only does it from his office during normal business hours. So if I see that happen between 8 and 5 Monday to Friday, and it's happening from Office 240, I can eliminate that from my alert stack because that's Bob doing his demonstration of that one app. Where other times when I see that, it's not a false positive, and I need to make sure that I can get my security team looking at that. So as you understand the data coming in and take a little time to look at that data, you'll be able to start to eliminate those false positives, and really keep that security team focused. And then, of course, making sure that you've prepared your internal processes. So how are you going to triage an alert in the proper fashion? Your SIEM alerts you to an active breach attempt. So you've determined this is real, we need to deal with it. So now what? Maybe I need to block an IP on the firewall, but then I need to go grab my network team to do that right now. So I can't wait until next week's change window to have that implemented. So have we thought about what those internal processes need to look like so that we can handle these alerts in a timely fashion and we can immediately take action in these different types of scenarios? So we need to think around that SIM as well, because it's not just the technology, it's also the human side. All has to work together.
All right, thank you, Bob. The next question, you mentioned a common use case for SIM is monitoring data from multiple sources. In your experience, what are the most common sources people are using in their SIM, Bob?
The most common connection types that I generally see are the ones that people would probably expect: Windows systems, Linux operating system logs. Third in line is probably network devices, so routers, firewalls, VPN appliances, load balancers, and the like. After that, it really varies a lot depending on your industry vertical and what it is you're looking at. Personally, I see a lot of IBM Power because that's a lot of the clientele that I work with on a regular basis. So IBM I, AIX, bigger Unix boxes. Other teams in our organization here work closely with financial firms. So those systems have a heavy load of in-house application monitoring. So they have customized internal applications for doing different business processes. And a lot of times they're more focused in on application type logging, pulling in home-built application outputs into that SIM. So that's kind of the general thing, but it really goes all across the board. Every organization has tons of different technology. We all like to think that we're really focused in on 2 or 3 laptop models, 2 or 3 PC and server models. But then you stagger that by the rates of when you're moving people off of one and into the next, when you're having to take equipment off of a desk and move it to another desk, and things really get complicated pretty fast. So it's, in general, it's kind of all over the place.
Very good. It looks like we have time for one more question. And the question is, how effective is SIM at monitoring both on-premises and cloud data sources?
I think SIM can be very effective at managing both premise and cloud environments, as well as those hybrids, which is where, honestly, most people are. There are a few newer, younger companies that are all in and wholly in the cloud, but most enterprises that we see are in that hybrid space. I've got my legacy set of systems and applications in my environments, and then I'm slowly starting to offload more and more of that to the cloud. So I need to be able to see both sides of that environment. And there's different types of information, of course, that are available there too. There's direct logging in the environment. So who is deploying what in the cloud, maybe who is spinning up what systems in our internal data center, what types of credentials are being created in either places, and, where are management logins happening from, who's doing it and from what workstation. If you are in a hybrid environment or a cloud environment, hopefully you're only using certain designated terminals to manage your cloud infrastructure. Should never be Bob's desktop where I have all kinds of things running and people connecting in for webinars. It should be a dedicated workstation in a dedicated place that is set up with only enough software to do what I need it to do, to help keep that area of attack down on those systems. Those different streams of information coming in from all the different types of assets, be it Windows systems, Linux systems, IoT devices. Maybe it's my wireless network routers I have spread out through my building. Maybe it's my security camera system. All those different areas are able to send data to me. Making sure that we can alert when those new servers are spun up in the cloud is a big thing in SIM. So making sure that we're able to see what's our standard baseline, what's happening now. Many times people won't even look in areas where they don't expect to see things, and of course, hackers know that too. If I'm looking at a U.S. company that generally is only spinning up in the U.S., and I get into your environment, I'm going to spin something up in Singapore because you're probably not going to see it over there. So making sure that we can see those baselines and the changes. And that's especially also important with storage areas. So if you're storing data in the cloud, what objects are being added, making sure that they have proper permissions, they're not liable to leak data to unauthorized parties, and even tracking log streams from all of these different applications being used, inside of our environment. So not only the ones that you know about, but ones that are internal, ones that are cloud-based, all of these different data streams coming together should be available to us in our SIM solution. That gives us a better visibility into our network, eliminates those blind spots, and lets us really hone in on fixing the things that we need to take care of.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. All right. With that, we're at the finish line for today's session. As we're closing this webinar, I would like to thank all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I would also like to thank you, Bob, for sharing your insights on how to mitigate cyber risk with security information and event management. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Now, this concludes today's session. I hope we will see all of you again at one of our future webinars. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.